this for 15 bucks. Not a bad deal, right? That is enough of things you guys did not ask for. On to the first session of this episode, which is 2-5 with a mandatory straddle, making it 2-5-10. This hand I pick up Ace-King of clubs in the low jack position. Under the gun opens to $30. The action folds to me and I 3-bet to $100. Pretty standard with my hand. Everyone folds except for the initial raiser, who calls. It's heads up into a flop of 10-5-4 with 2 spades and 1 club. The villain checks. I have a whole lot of nothing but overcards and backdoors. I think it's okay to c-bet or check back in this spot. Given there was no 4-bet pre-flop, which caps the villain's range, and me having position, I elect to c-bet to try and take it down now, and keeping my options open to potentially keep barreling, as I may hit some cards to pick up extra equity, etc. I make it $75, a third pot sizing. The villain calls. The turn is the 6 of spades. The villain checks again. Not a great card. The board is just getting worse for my hand and my range. The flush draw also completes, which I unblock. I just check back. The river is a jack. The villain now bets out $300. Overall, very bad run out for my hand. I'm losing to all value hands and might be losing to some bluffs, even though I don't think he's bluffing often in this spot. I fold. This hand, in my opinion, is the most interesting one of this episode. And I do need to establish some context. The main villain is regular. Just a few hands ago, he made a play with Ace-5 suited, also known as a GTO wizard hand, and also made it a point to show me and talk about it a little bit. I actually think it's a bit of a mistake on his part to do that. Anyways, more info for me. So I think he's a competent thinking player. I pick up Ace-King in the low jack position. I open to $30. The hijack calls. Our villain 3-bets to $120. The action folds back to me. Since my open was a relatively late position open and there was a cold caller, this is a good spot for a squeeze, and I think a competent player would pick that up. Ace-King is not necessarily always a 4-betting hand, but I think this is one of those spots to do it. I make it $350. I'm expecting the cold caller to fold. Taking the pot down pre-flop is always nice, but even if the main villain calls and we go heads up, I think I'm in pretty good shape against his range. The hijack does fold, and our main villain does call, so it's heads up into a flop of 8-7-4 with 2 hearts and 1 spade. I start with a check. You may be wondering why I'm not c-betting here after 4-betting pre-flop. Looking back, I probably should have just jammed. I'm only just repping aces or kings, but in the moment, I'm thinking I'm against a competent player. He knows, or should know, that checking aces or kings here is in my range for pot controlling or inducing bluffs, especially if I have aces with ace of hearts or kings with the king of hearts. And I happen to have the king of hearts. Whereas if I just jam, it's going to be so polarizing to the point that like he might make a good call with a bluff catching hand like pocket 9s or 10s, maybe sniffing out my ace king or putting me on ace king of hearts. Anyways, he bets $140. I call. The turn is an offsuit 3, essentially a brick. I check again. The villain continues to barrel, this time for $430. At this point, I actually don't think he has 9s or 10s because I think he's going to want to navigate the showdown with low to middling pocket pairs. That's not a set. And sets are just always jamming here. I don't think he would have called my 4-bet pre-flop with a dominated offsuit king or dominated offsuit ace. So what range of hands does that leave him with? With his barrels and sizings, I'm putting him on some kind of equity hand that could call 4 bets in position. 10 jack suited, 9-10 suited, or maybe even ace 5 or ace deuce of hearts. As I don't have the ace of hearts, I decide to call. You may be wondering, why not just jam? Am I not committed anyways if I'm going with my read? At the moment, I'm thinking that my message to him is really apparent. I don't believe he's beating me now, and I have so little left that if you, as in the villain, really do want to move in on the river, there's no way I'm not snapping it off. In my mind, I was actually prepared to fold if a hard comes, and prepared to commit on a brick, like a board pairing non-hard card. The river is the queen of hearts. Not exactly the brick I wanted to see. I check. At this point, I've accepted that I'm likely not good on this run out, and if he moves all in for the rest of my stack, I'm going to make the most confusing fold from the eyes of the table and save the $200 something I have. If he checks back, I'm also likely not good, but there's a slight chance he just barreled with nothing but range advantage. The villain tanks for quite a while, and then he checks back. We table our hands, and we chop this pot as we both have ace-king. This hand, I pick up ace-9 of spades in the small blind. The button opens to $30. I decide to cold call this one. The big blind folds. The straddler, or third blind, 3-bet squeezes to $110. The button folds, and the action is back on me. This is the same villain as the previous hand, so again, it's a good spot for him to squeeze, and I'm sure he knows. So I decide to defend with my hand. I call. It's heads up into a flop of Queen Jack 8, all clubs. I check. He checks back. The turn is a 7. I check again. He checks back again. The river is the king of clubs, putting a 4-card flush on the board, so anyone with a club completes a flush. I'm thinking that if this villain had any high club card, he would have barreled on the flop or turn. I decide to take a jab here. I bet $100, a sizing that kind of looks like it's for value, but I think big enough to fold out 1 pair hands. And the villain folds. This hand, I pick up ace-king in the middle position. I open to $30. The cutoff, his name is Michael. Shout out to him. He has told me he is a fan of my vlogs, and I got outplayed against him in a previous episode where he bluffed me. Anyways, Michael 3-bets to $110. The action folds back to me, and I call to complete the action. It's heads up into a flop of Jack 10-7 rainbow. I check. Michael C-bets for $60. With 2 overs and a gut shot, I call. The turn is a deuce, essentially a brick. I check again. Michael checks back. The river is a jack. At this point, I think the villain is very unlikely to have a jack checking back the turn, and in general, not a lot of Jack X holdings with 3-bet preflop aside from pocket jacks. But I think I could credibly be pot controlling with a jack on earlier streets, and now having trips on the river go for a value bet. I decide to bet out $150. My ace-king might be good enough for a showdown to check call, but just in case he has some kind of pocket pair that's not that strong type hand, I want to convince him I could have a jack with a bet size that leans towards value. Michael raises to $450. Not exactly what I expected. Of course, ace high is just too weak to call here. I fold. He shows deuce 3 of hearts, which is of course meant to be a bluff, but probably not expecting to be bluffing with the best hand. Nevertheless, very well played. This hand, I pick up what seems to be my favorite hand of the session, ace-king at the cutoff. I open to $30. Only the straddler, or third blind, defends. It's heads up into a flop of 9-7 deuce with 2 clubs. The villain checks. I check back. The turn is a queen. The villain checks again. At this point, doesn't look like the villain has much. I'm blocking ace-queen, king-queen. A delayed c-bet is likely to take it down. I make it $25. And that's good enough as the villain folds. This hand, I pick up 7-9 of spades on the button. Everyone folds to the cutoff, who opens to $30. I decide to cold call this one in position. The big blind and straddler also call. It's 4-way into a flop of 8-7-3 rainbow. Everyone checks to me. It's good to hit a pair, but it is second pair and it's multi-way, so I think it's okay to check back. But seeing how everyone checked and I blocked some straight draws, I think my second pair here could use some protection. I decide to bet $30. I go with this small sizing because if 8x are stronger or trapping, I'd likely know right away. I'd be happy to take it down now if everyone completely missed. But if someone had a hand like 6-7 or maybe even 3-4 suited, I can potentially get value from those. The big blind calls. The straddler check raises to $175. The cutoff calls, and with this action, I make a quick and easy fold. This hand, I pick up Queen 10 of diamonds at the cutoff. There's one limper before the action is on me. I raise it to $50. The straddler and limper both defend. It's three-way into a flop of ace queen king with 2 clubs and 1 diamond. Everyone checks in me. The flop smashes my range, and I happen to have a decent equity with a pair, gut shot, and backdoor flush. I c-bet for $50, and that's good enough as everyone folds. This hand, I pick up ace-9 of clubs at the cutoff. The hijack opens to $30. I call. The button calls. The small blind and big blind folds. The straddler 3-bets to $150. The hijack folds. I decide to call this one, which is a bit loose. At the moment, I read the aggressor to be a pretty straightforward player, so I felt that I could have a slight edge going against him in position. The button folds. It's heads up into a flop of deuce 3 jack with 2 spades and 1 club. The villain c-bets for $50. I have nothing but ace high and backdoor flush draw, but his sizing is very small and a jack high reg board is actually better for my range. I call. The turn is the queen of clubs. The villain bets out again, this time for $60. I'm definitely not going anywhere after picking up extra equity with a nut flush draw. His sizing is just so small, I feel like he can't ever be very strong. Unless he's so nutted that he wants to induce. Anyways, I think this is a good spot to be aggressive here. I raise it up to $300, and the villain folds. This hand, I pick up pocket queens in the straddle, or third blind. There are 3 limpers. The blinds fold and the action is on me. I raise it up to $60. All 3 limpers call. It's 4-way into a flop of queen deuce 3 rainbow. Awesome flop. I hit top set, dry board, multi-way. Only thing is that I'm out of position as the aggressor, so it could be tough to get heavy value unless someone has the last queen or I'm in a cooler situation with set over set. I c-bet for $50. I don't want to check because it's just going to get checked back a lot when I double block top pair. I go with the sizing because I still want to keep in pocket pairs. Everyone folds except for the cutoff. The turn is a 6. I think it's essentially a brick. There is a world that 4 or 5 suited gets there, but I don't think it's that likely with my $60 raise pre-flop. I decide to just continue betting for value and hope the villain also flopped a set for a cooler. I make it $250, and the villain folds. This hand, I pick up queen jack on the button. There's 1 limper before the action folds to me. I raise it to $50. Everyone folds except for the limper, who defends. It's heads up into a flop of jack 7-6 with 2 diamonds. The villain checks. Nice flop hitting top pair. I c-bet for $40. The villain calls. The turn is a 9. The villain checks again. Now, if the villain also has jack X, I could be in trouble, as I only beat jack 10 at this point. I think it's more likely, though, he has some kind of drawing hand. I do unblock the diamond flush draw, and there are some straight draws he could have called on the flop with, like 8-9 or 9-10 suited, and those would have picked up a pair on the turn. So I decide I can charge more value against those types of hands. I size up and bet $150. The villain calls again, and that's really signaling to me that he is on a draw, and I'm hoping the river breaks. The river is the king of hearts. The villain now bets out $300. I think for a bit, if the villain was strong earlier, or maybe even hitting a straight on the turn, there's no way he could have played that passively with a prominent flush draw on board. Maybe he weren't super strong, but strong enough to beat me, so a hand like ace-jack or pocket queens. But those hands just make no sense to now bet out on the river. The king on the river does help queen 10, but is he really continuing on that flop with that? And I do block it. So this line just seems so much like a missed flush draw, which I unblock. All of that taken into consideration, I decide to make the call. We table our hands, and I lose to king 5 of diamonds. There were some hands I was expecting to lose to, but very surprised to see that one. He misses flush draw, river's top pair, and decides to go for thin value. Very well played, sir. This hand, I pick up ace 4 of spades in the middle position. I open to $30, only the cutoff and straddler or third blind calls. It's three-way into a flop of 7-5-5 rainbow. Everyone checks. The turn is an ace. The straddler checks to me. Very nice to see an ace on the turn, giving me top pair. I bet $25. The cutoff calls. The straddler check raises to $100. Very strong move. Also, he does have the widest range defending the third blind, so trapping with 5x is in the realm of possibility. My ace with no kicker, just not good enough to continue here. I fold, and that is the end of the first session. On to session number 2 of this episode. We are again playing 2-5, but this time without the mandatory straddle. This hand, I pick up ace queen of clubs on the button. The middle position opens to $20. The low jack calls. I think my hand is good enough to 3-bet in position. I make it $100. The action folds back to the middle position, who 4-bets to $270. The low jack folds. I am not liking it. A lot of the villain's range just dominates my hand, but ace queen suited is just too strong to not see a flop in position, especially after putting money in. I call. It's heads up into a flop of 10 queen 8 with 2 spades and 1 club. The villain jams all in for $705, which puts me in the tank. The only hands I beat are ace king, ace x of spades, and pocket jacks, but his line leans towards pocket kings or aces, more likely kings since I have an ace. I did hit top pair with backdoors, so even if I'm behind, which is likely the case, I'm still going in with decent equity, but probably not for the right price. In the end, I flick in the call. The board runs. Turn is an 8, and river is a 9. We table our hands, and I lose to pocket kings. This hand, I pick up 10-8 in the big blind. Under the gun straddles to $10. Everyone folds to the small blind, who calls. I also call. The straddler checks. It's three-way into a flop of jack 9-3 with 2 diamonds. The small blind checks. I hit an open ender. I decide to bet out $10. This is a limp pot, so ranges are wide. Maybe I can take this one down with 10 high if everyone just completely whiffed. The small blind calls. The turn is a 3. The villain checks. I decide to check this one back and take the free card. The river is a brick. The villain checks again. I think 3x is never checking here. His line seems like a missed flush draw. I decide to take a jab and bet $25. And that's good enough to take it down. This hand, I pick up king 10 on the button. The low jack opens to $15. The cutoff calls. I decide to cold call in position. The big blind also joins in. It's 4-way into a flop of 10 deuce 8 with 2 spades. Everyone checks to me. Pretty good flop hitting top pair with a king kicker. I just bet $30. I'm blocking flush draws, and getting a weaker 10x to continue would be the ideal scenario. Everyone calls. The turn is a queen. Everyone checks to me again. With so many players calling the flop, that is not a great turn card. 9-jack gets there, gut shots like jack-queen and queen-9 also hit. I don't think my hand is good enough to continue going for value. I check back. The river is a 6. Everyone checks for the cutoff, who bets $110. It's a strong bet. I don't think he's bluffing multi-way, and even hands like 7-9 got there on the river. I just lay this one down. This hand, I pick up ace 8 at the cutoff. Everyone folds to me, and I open to $15. Both the blinds defend. It's 3-way into a flop of king 10-9 with 2 clubs. Everyone checks. The turn is a 7. Both villains check again. Now that I picked up equity with an open ender, I go for the delayed c-bet. I make it $30, and everyone folds. This hand, I pick up ace 4 of spades in the small blind. Under the gun opens to $20. Everyone folds to me and I cold call. The big blind also calls. It's three-way into a flop of ace deuce 7 rainbow. Good to hit top pair, but out of position multi-way, I start with a check. Everyone checks. The turn is a 3. I now bet out $25. The big blind raises to $75. Under the gun folds. I don't think my ace with the weak kicker is good at this point, but I did pick up extra equity with a gut shot on the turn. For $50 more, I make the call. The river is a 9, essentially a brick. I check. The big blind moves all in for $125. It was at this point that I realized he had so little left. I do tank for a bit, thinking I can't be good, but I somehow talk myself into thinking maybe I underrepped my hand on the flop and induced him to do this. Anyways, I end up calling, which is, looking back, a horrible call. We table our hands and I pay off the villain, who has pocket threes, turning a set. This concludes my second session of this episode. Later on, my buddy Mikey is in town, and along with my buddy Trevor, we decide to try the new Gordon Ramsay steak restaurant that opened at River Rock Casino. At the beginning montage of this video, you will have seen some of the food images. My honest opinion, service was excellent, but food was pricey and a bit underwhelming. Anyways, we play the weekly $80 Freezeout tournament. Mikey and I both make the final table, but I end up busting out, not making the money. Didn't film any hands for the tourney as I didn't think there were any interesting spots. And that is the end of a fun but unprofitable night. I'm now going to share the fourth session of this episode with you guys. It's a 1-3 game where I did not capture any footage, hence switching views. But I did document a few interesting hands, so here we go. This hand, I pick up King Queen in the low jack position. Under the gun +1, a very competent player opens to $10. I decide to cold call. The big blind also calls. It's three-way into a flop of King 4 with 2 spades. The big blind checks to the aggressor, who c-bets for $10. Awesome flop for me, hitting trips. There is merit to flat calling in position to trap and induce more barrels, but I think raising on later streets would appear way stronger, especially against strong players. Flat calling now and raising later basically telegraphs my hand. Also, in this configuration, a multi-way pot, I don't think a competent player is ever c-betting without either a made hand or equity hand. If he happens to have ace, king, or pocket fours, it's going to be a cooler that I'm doomed to lose and stack off. But he could also be betting out with king X hands that lose to me, or spade flush draw hands, which I unblock. Basically, there are 4 combos of ace king, 3 combos of pocket fours. So there are way more combos of king jack, king 10, down to king 9 suited, and ace X of spades, and any suited connector of spades. So all of which are in this villain's range. So I'm just going to target the latter category, none of which are folding to a raise. I raise it to $35. The big blind folds. The initial aggressor calls. The turn is a 5. Villain checks. Now it does look like he mostly has a flush draw or some weaker king X, so I'm just going to keep betting for value. I bet $80. The villain thinks for a bit, and then unexpectedly he jams all in. So here, I actually just call pretty quickly. Not much more to it. I'm either ahead and hope to hold, or just coolered by ace king or a boat, right? The river is a king, and I make quads, which of course is a winner now. We table our hands, and it turns out the villain was making an aggressive move with 7-8 of spades. On to the next hand. This hand I pick up 9-10 at the cutoff. The action folds to me, and I think this is a good spot to attack the blinds. I raise it to $10. Only the button calls. So this is just the worst result going into post-flop, out of position. Anyways, heads up, flop comes ace jack 6 with 2 hearts. I don't connect at all. But I do think I'm the one with range advantage on this flop. I see bet for $5. Pretty tiny bet, but I think range C betting here does not need to be too big at all. He's folding to any bet if he completely whiffed. He'll likely raise with a strong or decent ace, in which case I can just easily get away. But if he just calls, he's very unlikely to be strong. So depending on the run out, I can double or triple barrel to put a lot of pressure on Jack X or even ace with lower kicker type hands. And since I unblocked the hard draw as well, if he flat calls all the way, I could potentially barrel all the way. Anyways, yeah, villain calls. Turn is a 6. So I continue with my plan. I'm repping the ace, so this would be a good card to continue betting if I did have that. I size up and bet $25. Villain calls again. At this point, I have set up for a big bet relative to the pot on some river cards. River comes the Jack of Hearts. Right, so yeah, the main reason I thought this hand was kind of interesting is because I thought for a bit to decide whether or not this is a good card for me to fire a third barrel. On one hand, the hard draw, which I unblock, gets there. But I could actually rep Jack X getting here now. My hand blocks some Jack X combos, Jack 10, Jack 9. So if the villain has Ace X or a flush draw, all in his range now, like calling 2 bets, then the Jack might be the perfect scare card. However, non-believing Jack X is also in his range. And I have really set myself up to rep Ace X mostly. So he might still find a crying call with a flush. Ultimately, I decide that repping Jack X here is not too convincing because if I did have Jack X, I would have checked the turn. But that's not what I did. So I just give up and check. Villain ends up betting $45, seemingly for value, and I just fold. On to the next hand. This hand, I pick up Ace 4 of clubs. The middle position opens to $10. I cold call. Everyone else folds. It's heads up into a flop of Queen 5-9 with 2 clubs. Villain C bets for $10. Awesome flop, hitting the nut flush draw. I think calling or raising is good. I can't really go wrong here aside from folding. Ultimately, I decide to just call, and it's mainly because of his stack size. It's neither very deep nor short, but just shallow enough that if I do raise now and get called, he's basically committed, right? So I think leaving room for potentially a semi-bluff on the turn or a big river bluff is, if needed, is good. The turn is the 9 of clubs, so that's a bink for me. It does pair the board, so there's a possible cooler situation if the villain has a full house. But with his stack depth, it's just not going to matter too much. It is what it is. He continues to bet and makes it $15. So with a small sizing, I think he's now trying to navigate the showdown. So yeah, think about it. If he does have Queen X, that turn card is just the worst scare card for him. Yeah, non-believing 9X gets there, clubs gets there. But yeah, so raising here just lets him get off easily with Queen X, I think. So I call again to let him keep the betting lead. I'm just hoping now he somehow has 9X, and that's where I can get more value. Yeah. Okay, river is a 10. Villain bets out a pot-sized bet of $75. And I actually think for a bit. So obviously never folding, but can I jam for value is the question. Or is that only like just value owning myself? I think it's pretty close here. If he did have 9X, 9-10 suited is very reasonable. Ultimately, I do think there are weaker flushes in his range and maybe some Queen X hands with the club blocker that can find a crying call. I think all of those, yeah, he's just too committed to fold like those hands. So I jam all in. And the villain ends up folding. Okay, on to the next hand. This hand, I pick up pocket nines at under the gun +1. I open to $10. The middle position 3 bets to $30. Everyone folds and the action is back on me. So for this spot, I think calling most of the time would be the way to go. With the villain stack depth, I have enough odds to set mine. But pocket nines is decently strong. A lot of scenarios, I can make it to the end and have the best hand. There is a world that if the villain is a bit shorter and doesn't even have to be that short, like maybe around $200 where he's committed 15% or more of his stack already, I can actually 4-bet jam here. Because in that case, I could get called by ace-king or sometimes weaker pocket pairs. Yeah, that would be the way to counter like playing this hand post-flop out of position, which is not ideal. But anyways, here, I call. It's heads up into a flop of queen 6-4 with 2 clubs. I check. Villain bets $30. And this is a pretty good flop for me, I think. Obviously, queen is an overcard to my pair, but I think this villain's 3-betting range doesn't contain a whole lot of queen X. Like obviously, pocket queens with 3-bet, but yeah, with the queen on the flop, there's just way less combos of that. King queen suited and ace queen suited combos are my like main concerns as well. But I call and assess. Turn is an 8. I check again. Getting to showdown is my goal here. The villain checks back. And that is just, awesome news. That tells me my nines are good very often here. I lose to some pocket 10s and pocket jacks. But yeah, queen X, pocket kings, pocket aces are just never checking back this turn, right? With the front door flush out there. Okay, river is a jack. I check again. The villain now bets $50. Action is on me. So you might be thinking that, that jack is a scare card for me because it's another overcard to my pair. But think about what hand that jack on the river really helps. 9-10 for a straight. Yeah, but come on. That's almost never in there. I double block that hand, and he's not 3-betting me with 9-10. So not this player. In fact, if I thought I were behind, I can actually go over the top here to rep 9-10 of clubs. But if he has, I honestly think like the only Jack X hand that he would 3-bet with is pocket jacks, in which case I would have been behind all the way anyways. Even ace jack is very unlikely, and even then he would have to find a thin value bet on the river. And my read against this player is, I just don't buy that. So I flick in the call, and he mucks, and I'm good. And that is the last interesting hand of this session. And before reporting the results of all the sessions of this episode, that last session marks the final session of my Bankroll Challenge series. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, around 1 year ago, I got myself banned from about half the casinos in BC, and I decided to embark on this challenge series. So just track my stats and bankroll for this duration and see how that turns out. So 1 year has passed now. My ban has lifted. Actually, I still have yet to confirm that. I still have to walk in one of these casinos, let them check my ID and see if they let me in. That'll be fun. So I haven't looked at the numbers yet as a whole. But to be honest, I think my overall results are kind of underwhelming. Nevertheless, I am happy. I'm excited to share all of that with you guys, which will happen in the next video. Okay, so let's get back on track. Results for this episode. Yeah, first session was 2-5-10. I bought in for $2,000 and cashed out with $1,894. So that's a loss of $106. Second session, 2-5. Bought in for $2,500 and cashed out with $2,165. So that's a loss of $335. Session number 3, that is the $80 Freezeout tournament where I just busted, so loss of $80. Fourth session, the 1-3 game, which is my final session, I bought in for $500 and I cashed out with $1,010. So that is a profit of $510. Yeah, that is it. And I'm just going to skip the total bankroll update and save that for the final results in the next episode. And I promise I won't take long to put that together and share it. Yeah, that is it for this episode. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. Your support has been amazing. And I hope you guys look forward to the next.